Kim Woo adjusted his bright purple tie and grinned at the floating cameras surrounding his studio. The massive viewing screen behind him displayed the stunning nebula of Sector 7, where 3 alien species had recently signed a peace treaty. Thanks to human mediators. Welcome back to Galaxy Talk. Folks, I'm your host Kim Woo, and we've got some amazing stories coming up today. Our next guest is supposed to be Commander Yuki from the Mars Defense Fleet. But first let me tell you about this incredible restaurant on Station Omega where they serve food that actually changes color while you eat it. The studio audience of various alien species laughed and clapped. A group of blue-skinned Altarians in the front row made their trademark whizzing sound of approval. Kim loved his job, bringing different species together through entertainment, and laughter had become his life's mission. Suddenly, every screen in the studio flickered red. The cheerful background music cut out, replaced by the harsh beeping of an emergency transmission. Kim's smile disappeared as he recognized the priority signal. This was only used for the most urgent communications across the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're receiving an emergency broadcast, Kim announced, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The massive screen behind him crackled with static before revealing a familiar face. Park Hannah, Earth's top diplomat, appeared in holographic form. But this wasn't the confident woman Kim knew from countless diplomatic ceremonies. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her formal uniform torn and dirty. Most shocking of all were the tears streaming down her face. Woo, thank the stars you're still broadcasting. Hannah's voice trembled through the speakers. I don't have much time before they detect this transmission. The studio fell completely silent. Even the Altarians stopped their usual chittering. Kim could hear his own heartbeat in the sudden quiet. Hannah, where are you? We lost contact with your diplomatic mission 3 months ago. The whole galaxy thinks you're dead, Kim said, leaning forward in his chair. Behind Hannah, strange crystalline structures pulsed with dim light. The environment looked like nothing Kim had ever seen. Not quite alien architecture, but not natural either. Something moved in the shadows behind her, tall and graceful, but somehow wrong. I'm in the Veil sector. On a world the star charts call Lumina Prime. But listen carefully. Humanity needs to act now. The stellar people are dying, not from disease or war, but from something far worse. They're losing all hope or reason to exist, and only we can save them. Kim's producer frantically gestured from behind the cameras, pointing at the viewer count. It was climbing rapidly as emergency networks across the galaxy picked up the signal. Billions of beings were now watching. The Stellars are the most advanced species I've ever encountered, Hannah continued, glancing nervously over her shoulder. They've mastered technology we can't even imagine. Their cities float in the clouds, powered by captured starlight. They can travel between dimensions. Between dimensions. A soft, haunting sound echoed from somewhere behind Hannah, like wind chimes made of crystal, but infinitely sad. But they've evolved beyond emotions, beyond the messy, wonderful chaos. That makes life worth living. They're dying because they can't remember why they should want to live. Their birth rates have dropped to almost nothing. Their art is mathematical equations. Their music is just frequencies calculated for optimal efficiency. Kim watched his friend break down on live television, broadcasting to species across dozens of star systems. Hannah, how can we help? What do you need? They've been studying me for months, trying to understand why humans fight so hard to survive, when survival itself serves no logical purpose. They can't comprehend hope. They can't understand why we create art that serves no function, why we tell stories that aren't factual, why we sing songs just because they make us feel good. Crystalline structures behind her pulsed brighter, and Hannah looked round frantically. "I have to go. They're coming back." But Wu, if anyone is listening, and I know millions are, humanity has something the Stellars have lost. We have the ability to find meaning in meaninglessness, to create beauty from chaos. To hope when hope makes no sense. She reached toward the camera, her hand seeming to pass through the holographic projection. "Don't let the Federation stop you. Don't let anyone tell you it's not our problem. The Stellars are teaching their children that existence is just a mathematical equation to be solved. Can you imagine a universe where no one laughs, where no one cries, where no one dreams?" The transmission began to break up, Hannah's image flickering like a failing light bulb. "Tell them, Wu, tell them that sometimes the most logical thing, caring about strangers you'll never meet, is the most human thing of all." The screen went black, leaving Kim staring at his own reflection in the dark surface, the weight of the galaxy's attention pressing down on his shoulders like a collapsing star. Kim Wu leaned back in his chair, his mind racing as he processed what had just happened. The studio remained eerily quiet, with alien audience members whispering among themselves in dozens of different languages. The Altarians had turned from their usual cheerful blue to a worried purple color. Lady's hand. "Gentlemen, we're going to take a short break while we try to establish contact with our networks," Kim announced, though he knew the cameras were still rolling on emergency channels across the galaxy. During the commercial break, Kim's communication panel lit up like a Christmas tree. Messages poured in from every corner of known space. Human colonies, alien governments, even the mysterious void dwellers who rarely spoke to anyone. Everyone wanted to know more about Park Hannah's desperate message. His assistant, Leuna, rushed over with a data pad. "Kim, I've been digging through the archives. Park Hannah's mission was classified, but I found some public records. She was part of a deep space exploration team that launched 8 months ago on the starship Harmony." Kim scrolled through the information. The Harmony was humanity's most advanced exploration vessel, equipped with quantum drive that could reach the furthest edges of the galaxy. The crew of 50 included scientists, diplomats, and first contact specialists. "Look at this." Yuna pointed to a section of the report. 3 months ago, they detected unusual energy signatures from the Vale sector. The last official transmission said they were investigating what appeared to be an ancient civilization. When the show resumed, Kim faced the cameras with renewed purpose. "Friends across the galaxy, we've just witnessed something extraordinary. Our colleague Park Hannah has made contact with a species called the Stellars, and she needs our help." The main screen flickered back to life, showing a recorded message that had arrived during the break. Hannah appeared again, this time in what looked like a vast crystal chamber. The walls seemed alive, pulsing with soft light that followed no pattern humans could understand. "Wu, I managed to record this while they're in their rest cycle. I need to tell you what I've discovered here." Hannah's voice echoed strangely in the crystal space. "The Stellars weren't always like this. I found their historical records, and they used to be incredible." Behind her, holographic images began appearing, ancient stellar cities that floated among the clouds, their spires reaching toward twin suns. The architecture was breathtaking, combining organic curves with geometric precision. Flying creatures that looked like living jewels soared between the buildings 2,000 years ago. They were artists, poets, dreamers. They created beauty that could make you weep just by looking at it. Their music could actually change the color of their atmosphere. They had festivals that lasted for months, where entire planets would celebrate the simple joy of being alive. The images shifted to show stellar families, tall, elegant beings, with skin that shimmered like pearls. They were laughing, dancing, embracing each other with obvious love and affection. But then they discovered pure logic. Hannah continued, her voice growing sadder. They developed technology that could enhance their minds, make them smarter, more efficient. At first, it seemed wonderful. They solved diseases, ended wars, created paradise. The happy scenes faded, replaced by sterile laboratories and geometric cities that looked more like mathematical equations than places where living beings would want to spend their lives. The problem was, each generation became more logical than the last. They began to see emotions as flaws to be corrected. Love became an inefficient chemical reaction. Art became a waste of resources. Joy was classified as a mental disorder. Kim watched in horror as the images showed stellar children being fitted with devices that dulled their emotional responses. Adults walking through beautiful gardens without stopping to appreciate the flowers. Musicians creating songs based entirely on mathematical formulas rather than feeling. I've been living among them for months now, Hannah explained. And Wu, it's heartbreaking. They have everything any species could want. Unlimited energy, perfect health, technology that borders on magic. But they've forgotten why any of it matters. The camera followed Hannah as she walked through a stellar nursery. The babies didn't cry. They made quiet, analytical sounds. The caretakers fed them and changed them with mechanical precision, showing no warmth or affection. Their children no longer laugh, Hannah said, her voice breaking. When I tried to play peekaboo with one of their babies, the caretakers were confused. They asked me why I was making inefficient facial expressions. They couldn't understand that I was trying to bring joy to the child. She moved to another area where adult Stellars sat in front of easels, creating what they called art, but instead of paintings or sculptures. They produced complex mathematical equations that supposedly represented beauty in its purest form. Their artists create nothing that touches the soul. Hannah continued. I showed them a simple human painting, just a sunset over a wheat field, and they analyzed it for us, trying to understand why anyone would waste time creating something so impractical. The transmission quality began to deteriorate as strange interference patterns appeared on the screen. They're curious about humanity because we're the only species they've encountered that still chooses emotion over pure logic. They've been studying me like a fascinating puzzle, trying to understand why we make decisions that don't maximize efficiency. Kim felt a chill as he realized the implications. Hannah, are you safe? Are they treating you well? They're not cruel. Wu, they don't understand cruelty any more than they understand kindness. They provide for my physical needs perfectly, but they can't comprehend why I sometimes cry for no logical reason, or why I sing when I'm happy. The camera shook as Hannah looked round nervously. I have to hurry. They'll be returning soon. The point is, they're dying as a species. Their population has dropped by 90% in the last 500 years. They can't understand why they should continue to exist if existence serves no logical purpose. But you said only humans can help them. How? Hannah's image became clearer for a moment. And Kim could see the determination in her eyes despite her tears, because we're the only ones crazy enough to believe that love is more important than logic. That beauty is worth creating even if it serves no purpose. That hope matters even when hope makes no sense. They need to remember how to feel. Woo, and somehow, I think we're the only species in the galaxy that can teach them. The transmission cut out again, leaving Kim staring at a blank screen. But this time, he wasn't alone with the weight of responsibility. His communication panel showed that every human settlement in known space was now watching, and messages of support were flooding in from across the galaxy. The rescue of the stellar people had begun. Park Hannah's journey to the Vale sector had started 6 months earlier aboard the exploration vessel Harmony. She remembered standing on the bridge, watching the stars stretch into lines as they jumped to faster than light speed. The crew was excited. They were heading to investigate mysterious energy readings that didn't match any known technology in the galaxy. Captain O'Domin had chosen Hannah for the mission because of her gift for understanding alien cultures. She had successfully made first contact with 12 different species, always finding ways to bridge the gap between human thinking and alien logic. Look at those readings, Science Officer Kim Jae-hyun had said, pointing at his instruments. The energy signatures are off the charts, but they're not chaotic. There's a pattern here, like someone is controlling massive amounts of power with incredible precision. The harmony had dropped out of hyperspace near a system with twin yellow suns, but what they found defied everything they thought they knew about space travel and civilization. Floating in the void between planets were massive crystal structures, each one the size of a small moon. They pulsed with gentle light, connected by streams of pure energy that flowed like rivers of starlight. The sight was so beautiful that half the crew just stood there staring. "My God," Captain O had whispered. "It's like someone built a work of art in space itself." But as they got closer, something felt wrong. The structures were perfectly ranged, mathematically precise, but there was no warmth to them, no signs of the messy, chaotic life that usually surrounded advanced civilizations. Hannah had been the first to notice the ships, sleek vessels that moved in perfect formation, their hulls reflecting the light of the twin suns like mirrors. They approached the harmony without any of the curiosity or caution that most species showed when meeting strangers. The first communication had come as pure mathematics, equations that somehow conveyed meaning directly into their minds. The beings called themselves the Stellar Collective, and they were interested in studying the humans. They want to learn about our emotional responses. Hannah had translated after hours of trying to understand their strange communication method. They seem fascinated by the fact that we make decisions based on feelings rather than pure logic. What started as a diplomatic exchange became something much stranger. The Stellars invited a small team to visit their home world, and Hannah volunteered to be the primary ambassador. The journey to Lumina Prime had taken 3 days aboard a stellar transport ship. The vessel was a marvel of engineering. Its walls were transparent crystal that could become solid or see-through at will. There were no controls that Hannah could recognize, just smooth surfaces that responded to the pilot's thoughts. But during the entire journey, none of the stellar crew members spoke to each other. They communicated through brief mental exchanges, sharing only necessary information. There was no casual conversation, no jokes, no complaints about their duties. It was like traveling with beautiful, living robots. Lumina Prime itself was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. The planet's surface was covered in floating cities made of the same crystal material as the space structures. Each city was a perfect geometric shape, spheres, cubes, pyramids, all connected by bridges of solidified light. The stellars themselves were unlike any species Hannah had ever encountered. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that shifted between silver and pearl white. Their faces were perfectly symmetrical, beautiful in a way that made them look like living sculptures. But their eyes were the most unsettling part, completely black, like looking into deep space. "Welcome, Human Park Hannah," the lead stellar had said when she arrived. Their voice was like music, but music without soul. "We have prepared optimal living conditions for your biological requirements." They had given her a quarters in one of the floating cities, a room that adjusted its temperature, lighting, and even air composition based on her physical needs. It was the most comfortable place she had ever lived, but also the LONELIST days turned into weeks as Hannah tried to understand stellar society. She was allowed to observe their daily activities, to witness their advanced technology, to study their culture. What she discovered broke her heart. The Stellars had once been a passionate, creative species. Their historical archives, stored in crystal memory banks, showed a civilization that had celebrated life with incredible enthusiasm. They had created art that could make planets change color, music that could heal emotional wounds, poetry that could make stars dance in new patterns. But somewhere in their past, they had made a choice, faced with the chaos and pain that came with emotions. They had decided to evolve beyond them. Generation by generation, they had modified themselves, removing what they saw as the inefficient parts of consciousness. The result was a species that had achieved near perfection in every measurable way. They had conquered death, mastered space and time, created technology that seemed like magic, but they had lost the ability to appreciate any of it. Hannah watched stellar children being educated by machines that fed information directly into their minds. The children absorbed knowledge at an incredible rate, but they never asked why or what if. They never played games or told stories or wondered about things that had no practical purpose. She observed stellar artists creating their mathematical masterpieces, equations so complex they could describe the birth and death of entire galaxies. The work was intellectually stunning, but it stirred no emotions, told no stories, shared no dreams. Most heartbreaking of all were the stellar families. Parents and children lived together, provided for each other's needs, even showed a form of affection by sharing mental connections, but they never laughed together, never held each other during moments of fear or sadness, never created silly inside jokes or traditions that served no purpose except to bring joy. They've lost what makes life worth living. Hannah had transmitted to Kim Woo, knowing that her words would reach every human settlement in known space. The broadcast was more than just a cry for help. It was a warning about what humanity could become if they ever chose logic over love. As the transmission ended, Hannah looked out at the crystal city floating in the clouds round her. It was beautiful, perfect, and utterly lifeless. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the Stellars returning from their daily activities, moving with quiet efficiency through their flawless world. But for the first time since arriving on Lumina Prime, Hannah felt hope, because she knew that across the galaxy, humans were listening, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was refusing to let others suffer alone. The response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Within an hour of Park Hannah's broadcast ending, Kim Woo's studio communication systems were overloaded with incoming messages. Every human colony, space station, and mining outpost was calling in, asking the same question: how can we help? On Mars Station 7. Commander Lee Jin was supposed to be reviewing supply reports when Hannah's message came through. Instead, she found herself staring at the holographic display, tears streaming down her face as she watched her friend's desperate plea from across the galaxy. "Cancel all my meetings," she told her aide. "Lieutenant Park So-young, get me a direct line to every transport captain in the system." Legion had grown up on a colony ship, surrounded by music and stories that helped keep colonists' spirits alive during the long journey between stars. She understood better than most how art and emotion could mean the difference between hope and despair. Within 2 hours, she had commandeered 12 cargo vessels and began loading them with an unusual kind of relief. Supplies instead of food and medicine. The ships were filled with musical instruments, art supplies, books of poetry, and recordings of children laughing. "Mom, the Galactic Federation is demanding to know what we're doing," reported Captain Kim Tae-ho from the bridge of the lead transport ship. "They're saying we don't have authorization for a relief mission. Tell them we're delivering cultural exchange materials," Legion replied with a grin. "Perfectly legal under Section 847 of the Interspecies Contact Protocols," Meanwhile, on the entertainment planet of New Seoul, comedian and performer Choi Min was in the middle of his nightly show when news of Hannah's message reached him. He immediately stopped his routine and turned to his audience of humans and friendly aliens. Ladies and gentlemen, we just received word that our people need help. Not the kind of help that comes from weapons or medicine, but the kind that comes from the heart. The audience erupted in cheers as Choi Min announced he was organizing a convoy of entertainers to join the rescue mission. Within hours, his dressing room was packed with volunteers, singers, dancers, comedians, storytellers, and street performers. Even the alien members of his regular audience wanted to help. "I may not be human," said Zix, a purple-scaled Draknari juggler, "but I've learned more about joy from working with humans than from my own species. Count me in." The response wasn't limited to adults on the agricultural world of New Bizen. -1-year-old young Minho heard his parents talking about the broadcast. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew someone was sad and needed help. Using his tablet, Minho created a simple drawing of stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. At the bottom, he wrote in crayon, "For the sad space people, I hope this makes you smile." He uploaded his drawing to the Galactic Network with the hashtag Hope for Stellaris, not knowing that within hours, millions of children across human space would be doing the same thing. The network was flooded with drawings, songs recorded on bedroom computers, and videos of kids explaining why sharing happiness was important on Earth, in the old United Nations building. Secretary General UNHCR was dealing with a crisis of a different kind. The Galactic Federation had issued an official complaint, demanding that humanity stop what they called an authorized intervention in internal affairs of a sovereign species. The Federation's ambassador, a tall crystalline, being called High Council of X, materialized in her office via hologram, his geometric form pulsing with angry red light. "Secretary General Yoon, your species is violating established protocols. The stellar situation is not humanity's concern. We cannot allow emotional responses to override logical diplomatic procedures." UNHCR looked at the alien diplomat with barely contained fury. "High Counselor, with all due respect, when did we decide that logic was more important than compassion? Logic prevents chaos. Logic ensures order. Your emotional responses lead to conflict and inefficiency. Our emotional responses also lead to art, music, love, and the determination to help others even when it's inconvenient." Yoon stood up, her small frame somehow intimidating despite the alien's towering presence. "We're not asking for your permission, Counselor. We're informing you of our decision. The Federation threatened economic sanctions, travel restrictions, even military intervention. But humanity had made up its collective mind, from the outer rim mining colonies to the core worlds. The message was the same. The Stellars needed help, and humans were going to provide it. The convoy that assembled at the edge of Federation space was magnificent and chaotic in equal measure. Military transports flew alongside converted cargo haulers. Luxury yachts traveled next to working class family ships. The fleet stretched for hundreds of kilometers, a collection of vessels that had never been designed to work together, but somehow did. Admiral Hong Ji-taek, commanding the operation from the battleship New Harmony, watched his sensors as more ships continued to arrive. "Sir, we now have over 300 vessels of various types. I'm not sure how we're going to coordinate this." "We're not going to coordinate it, Admiral," came the reply from his second-in-command, Captain Beksunmi. "We're going to let it be beautifully, chaotically human." Each ship carried its own contribution to the mission. The transport vessels were packed with musicians who had volunteered to teach the Stellars about rhythm and melody. Artist colonies had sent their best painters, sculptors, and writers. Professional comedians traveled alongside amateur storytellers who just wanted to share their favorite jokes. But perhaps most importantly, ordinary families had come too. Parents who wanted to show the Stellars what it looked like when children played, grandparents who carried decades of wisdom about finding joy in simple moments, teenagers who understood better than anyone what it meant to feel misunderstood and alone. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Kim Woo's voice reached them on every communication channel. He was broadcasting live from his studio, which had become an unofficial command center for the rescue operation. To everyone who answered the call, you represent the best of what it means to be human. You're not carrying weapons or technology to the Stellars. You're carrying something far more powerful, the belief that every life has value, that every being deserves to experience joy, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to let someone suffer. Alone, the Galactic Federation's final warning came just as the fleet entered hyperspace. Humanity, you are making a mistake that will have consequences for your entire species. But it was too late. 300 ships full of music, laughter, art, and hope were already racing toward the Veil sector, carrying with them everything that made life worth living. The rescue of the stellar people had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Lumina Prime like a colorful explosion against the sterile perfection of stellar space. Admiral Hong Ji-tak watched through the viewports of the New Harmony as 300 mismatched ships spread out in what could generously be called a formation. "Sir, the stellar defense grid is activating," reported Captain Beksanmi. "They're not targeting us, but they're analyzing us through the transparent sections of his bridge." Han could see the massive crystal structures that surrounded the stellar home world. Each one was the size of a small city, pulsing with mathematical precision. But now they were pulsing faster, as if confused by the chaotic arrival of the human rescue fleet. "Open a channel to all ships," Han ordered. "Let's show them we come in peace." What happened next would be talked about in taverns across the galaxy for generations. Instead of a formal military greeting, the communication channels erupted with music. The transport ship Melody had a full orchestra aboard, and they began playing a simple children's song. Other ships joined in with their own instruments, creating a symphony that had never been rehearsed but somehow worked perfectly. On Lumina Prime, Park Hannah felt the change immediately. She had been in the crystal observation chamber with stellar leader Quen 7, watching the approaching fleet through their advanced sensors. "These vessel configurations are inefficient," Quen 7 had noted, their voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Their formation lacks mathematical precision, yet their approach vector is curious." Then the music reached them. Hannah watched in amazement as Quen 7's perfectly smooth features showed something they hadn't displayed in centuries. Confusion mixed with something that might have been one. "Duh. What is that sound pattern?" Quen 7 asked. "It serves no logical purpose, yet it creates unusual electromagnetic fluctuations in my neural pathways. That," Hannah said with tears in her eyes, "is what we call music. And if you're feeling something strange, that's because it's beautiful." The first human shuttles to land on Lumina Prime carried carefully selected teams. Legion had insisted that the initial contact group include children, reasoning that if anything could reach the Stellar's buried emotions, it would be the pure joy of human kids who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of showing their feelings. 9-year-old Nam Soo-jin was the first human child to step onto the crystal surface of a stellar city. She looked up at the towering stellar beings who had gathered to observe them, pulled out a worn teddy bear from her backpack, and walked right up to the nearest one. "Hi, I'm Soo-jin. This is Mr. Patches. He's really good at hugs. Do you want to try?" The stellar being, identified as researcher VIX-12, stared down at the small human in their entire existence. No one had ever offered them a hug. The concept didn't exist in their language. I do not comprehend the purpose of this physical contact ritual, VIX-12 said, but they bent down anyway. Sujin wrapped her arms round the Stella's neck and squeezed tight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then VIX-12's skin began to shimmer with colors that hadn't been seen on Lumina Prime for 1,000 years, warm golds and soft blues that rippled across their formlake. E-waves. Query. Why do my optical sensors produce excess moisture? VIX-12 asked, touching their face where something that looked suspiciously like tears were forming. This response is not logical. That's okay, Sujin said, patting their shoulder. Sometimes the best things aren't logical. The breakthrough came when comedian Choi Min set up his portable stage in the central plaza of the main Crystal City. He had studied stellar psychology during the journey, working with Park Hannah via quantum communication to understand what might reach them. His first joke was terrible, a simple pun about quantum mechanics that made the human audience groan, but something unexpected happened. One of the stellar observers, a being called Keeper Zulfor, made a sound that was almost like laughter. That wordplay creates an inefficient logical loop in my processing matrix, Zulfor said. Yet it is amusing. Choi Min grinned. He had found his opening over the following days. Something magical happened throughout the stellar cities. Musicians from the transport ship Harmony began teaching stellar children how to make sounds just because they sounded nice. The children's first attempts were mathematically perfect, but emotionally empty, but slowly. As they watched human children bang on drums and sing off-key with pure joy, something changed. Artist colonies set up studios in the Crystal Gardens, painting landscapes not because they served a purpose, but because they were beautiful. Stellar adults would stand and watch for hours, trying to understand why humans would create images of things that already existed. But we can observe the actual sunset, noted observer Kex9. Watching elderly painter Moon Hajin work on a canvas, why create an inferior replica? Because, Moon replied, adding a splash of orange to her sky. When I paint it, I get to see it through my heart as well as my eyes. And maybe when you look at my painting, you will see it through my heart too. The most dramatic change came when families began sharing their evening routines with the Stellars. The Kim family from New Bizen had brought their 3 children, and every night they would gather in their assigned quarters to tell bedtime stories. Stellar parents began to observe these sessions, fascinated by the concept of sharing narratives that weren't factual reports or historical data. When 5-year-old Kim Ji-woo asked a stellar parent, "Don't you tell your babies stories before sleep?" The stellar being, caregiver Ren3, paused for a long moment. We download educational data into their rest cycles for optimal learning efficiency. That sounds boring, Ji-woo declared. Want me to tell your baby a story about friendly dragons? That night, for the first time in centuries, a stellar child went to sleep listening to a story about magic and adventure instead of mathematical equations. And for the first time in that child's life, they dreamed. Park Hannah watched it all from the observation chambers, serving as translator between 2 completely different ways of experiencing existence. She had learned to speak in mathematical concepts when working with the stellar leaders, but also to explain human emotions in terms that logical minds could begin to grasp. The human emotional responses create neural pathway variations that increase creative problem-solving capabilities, she explained to the Stellar Council. Their inefficient behaviors actually make them more adaptable. But the real change came when the Stellars began to remember what they had lost, deep in their historical archives. Stored in crystal memory banks were records of their own past, Times when they had felt joy, created art for pleasure, loved each other without logical justification. As human musicians played in their crystal cities and human children laughed in their gardens, the Stellars began to access memories they had suppressed for generations. They remembered what it felt like to watch a sunset and feel wonder instead of just recording the light wavelength data. They remembered creating art that served no purpose except to make others happy. And slowly, incredibly, they began to remember how to feel. The healing had begun, and both species were being transformed by the contact. 6 months after the human fleet arrived at Lumina Prime, Kim Woo stood in his studio preparing for what would become the most watched broadcast in galactic history. Behind him, the massive screen displayed a live feed from the stellar homeworld, showing something that would have been impossible to imagine just half a year earlier. Stellar children were playing. Not the organized, efficient activities that their species had practiced for centuries, but genuine, chaotic, joyful play. They chased each other through crystal gardens, their skin shimmering with colors that changed based on their emotions. They built towers out of light blocks just to knock them down and laugh at the pretty explosions, ladies and gentlemen, beings. Across the galaxy, Kim began, his voice thick with emotion. What you're seeing is nothing short of a miracle. The camera zoomed in on a group of young stellars who were learning to play hide-and-seek with human children. Their mathematical minds had initially tried to calculate the most efficient hiding spots, but gradually they were learning that sometimes the fun was in being found. 6 months ago, these children had never laughed. They had never played a game that served no purpose except joy. They had never experienced the simple pleasure of being silly. In the crystal cities floating above Lumina Prime's clouds, something extraordinary was happening. The perfectly geometric structures were changing, growing organic curves and impossible spirals as stellar architects rediscovered the beauty of imperfection. Buildings that had been designed purely for function were being redesigned to inspire wonder. Park Hannah appeared on screen, standing next to stellar leader Quen 7 in what used to be called the Logic Center. It was now known as the Harmony Hall. Both were watching a concert where human musicians played alongside stellar sound artists, creating music that was mathematically complex but emotionally rich. The transformation hasn't been easy, Hannah explained to Kim's audience. There were moments when the stellars wondered if they were making a mistake, if emotions would make them weak or inefficient. But look round you. The camera panned across the hall, showing stellar adults listening to music with tears streaming down their faces. Not tears of sadness, but tears of joy at experiencing beauty for the first time in centuries. Some were trying to dance, their movements awkward but enthusiastic as they learned to let their bodies respond to rhythm rather than just their minds. They haven't become less intelligent. Hannah continued, if anything, they've become more creative, more innovative. Their recent technological breakthroughs have accelerated because they're finally asking what if instead of just what is. The scene shifted to a stellar art gallery where the walls displayed a mixture of mathematical equations and finger paintings made by children. Adult stellars stood contemplating both with equal seriousness, finally understanding that beauty could exist in complexity and simplicity alike. Kim wiped his eyes as he watched a particularly touching scene. Elderly stellar scientist Keeper Zolfor was learning to tell bedtime stories to young stellars, his voice gradually becoming warmer and more expressive as he described adventures in magical forests and brave heroes who saved the day. No through logic, but through love. But the real miracle was happening in the stellar nurseries. For the first time in 500 years, birth rates were increasing. Stellar couples were choosing to have children not because it was logically necessary for species, Continuation. But because they wanted to share the joy of life with a new generation, the broadcast cut to a scene that made viewers across the galaxy gasp in wonder. A group of stellar artists had created a new form of art, living sculptures made of controlled starlight that responded to the emotions of viewers when humans looked at them with joy. The sculptures bloomed with warm colors when they felt sadness. The lights became gentle and comforting. This is what happens when logic and emotion work together, explained Dr. Yu Menchon, one of the human psychologists who had stayed on Lumina Prime to help with the transition. The Stellars haven't abandoned their intelligence, they've enhanced it with wisdom. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the Galactic Federation was holding an emergency session. High Counselor Vex, the same crystalline being who had tried to stop the human mission, stood before representatives of dozens of species the human intervention in stellar affairs has produced. Unexpected results, Vex admitted, his geometric form flickering with what might have been embarrassment. Population growth in the Vale sector has increased by 300%. Technological innovation has accelerated beyond all projections. Most disturbing of all, happiness levels among Federation citizens have begun to rise in sectors with high human contact. Ambassador Yuni Cha, representing Earth in the Federation, stood to address the Council. Councilor Vex, are you suggesting that happiness is a problem? Happiness is inefficient, Vex replied, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. It leads to unpredictable behavior. It also leads to hope, creativity, and the willingness to help others, Yoon shot back. The Stellars aren't the only species that could benefit from remembering how to feel. The debate that followed would reshape galactic politics for generations. Species that had long suppressed their emotions in favor of pure logic began to question whether they had made the right choice. Worlds that had banned art and music started to allow small cultural exchanges with human colonies. Back on Lumina Prime, the changes were accelerating. Stellar engineers were designing spaceships that were beautiful as well as functional. Their poets were creating verses that made listeners cry with joy. Their children were asking endless questions about everything, driving their parents crazy in the most wonderful way possible. The final scene of Kim Woo's broadcast showed something that symbolized the transformation better than any words could. In the center of the main crystal city, humans and Stellars had built a playground together. It served no logical purpose, generated no resources, contributed nothing to the efficiency of the city. It existed purely to make children happy. Kim watched as young Stellars and human kids played together on swings that were made of solidified starlight, slides that shifted color based on how fast you went down them, and climbing structures that rearranged themselves to create new challenges. The laughter echoed through the crystal canyons, a sound that would have been impossible just months earlier. What we're witnessing, Kim said as the broadcast neared its end, is proof that the universe is big enough for both logic and love, for both efficiency and joy. The Stellars haven't become less than they were. They've become more. The camera pulled back to show the entire planet. Its crystal cities now pulsing with warm, organic light instead of cold mathematical precision. Ships were arriving daily, not just human vessels, but representatives from dozens of species who wanted to learn about this new way of living that combined the best of reason and emotion. The Galactic Federation initially called our mission a violation of interspecies protocol. Kim continued, but sometimes the most important laws are the ones written in the heart, not in legal documents. Sometimes the most logical thing to do is to follow your emotions. As the broadcast ended, messages poured in from across the galaxy. Species that had never communicated with humans before were requesting cultural exchanges. Worlds that had banned laughter were asking for teachers. The universe was waking up to possibilities it had forgotten existed. Park Hanna's courage in sending that desperate message had started a chain reaction that would echo through the stars for millennia. Kim Woo's decision to broadcast her play had turned a cry for help into a galactic awakening. The rescue mission to save the stellar people had ended up saving something much bigger. It had reminded the entire galaxy that the most advanced civilizations weren't necessarily the most logical ones, but the ones that remembered how to hope, how to dream, and how to care about strangers they would never meet. In the end, humanity's greatest export wasn't technology or military might. It was the simple, revolutionary idea that life was worth living not because it was efficient, but because it was beautiful. And across the galaxy, on a million worlds, children who had never been allowed to laugh were finally learning how to smile. The end.